All right, well, I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Lewis Miller Museum. I would offer you that you can go out and get some wine and donuts, but right now we're kind of packed here. It'll have to be after, but there's drinks and wine and donuts in the back. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Rick Farinini. I am the town historian of the town of Hoosick. I'm also the president of the Historical Society here in the town of Hoosick. So I'll do a quick introduction of our guests that we have here, our guest contributors. So first, we'll go with the oldest first. This is my brother David Hanyos. His brother and my brother as well, Dwayne Hanyos. We have Curtis Waterman, who is their brother. Those three, they are Onondaga Beaver Clan Indians. I'll give you a quick. For anybody that doesn't know, I know a lot of people here. A lot of people don't know me, but I've always had an interest in local history and lifelong history. So, and to the credit of modern ancestry, my son Ed, who started this ball rolling in May of this year, I discovered that David and Dwayne and I share the same father, David Hanyos. So that's what sent me on this journey on the Haudenosaunee in the Revolution. So we can go forward from there. I have a quick opening statement. So imagine fighting a war where no matter who wins, your people still lose. For many Native American nations, this was the reality of the American Revolutionary War. When most people think about the Revolutionary War, they picture patriots, redcoats, and famous leaders like George Washington or King George III. What is often forgotten is that Native Americans were deeply involved in this conflict, and the war had lasting effects on their lives, lands, and futures. For Native Americans, the Revolutionary War was not simply a fight between Britain and the colonies. It was a struggle for survival. Different tribes faced different choices, whether to support the British, side with the colonists, or to try to remain neutral. Each option carried serious risks, and no matter the choice, Native communities often suffered devastating consequences. Understanding the role of Native Americans in the Revolutionary War helps us see the conflict from a broader perspective. It reminds us that the war was not just about independence, but also about land, power, and the future of entire nations who had lived on this land long before the colonies existed. So I have a slide presentation that we're going to kind of walk through as we go. So the Haudenosaunee, we'll talk about that real quick first. It's the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as, but within the nations, it's really the Haudenosaunee. And Iroquois was probably an Algonquin word, and then the French really called the five nations at the time the Iroquois. It can be, on some levels, be talked as a derogatory term, because in the Algonquin language and in the Iroquois can mean dark snake or dirty snake, so it really at one time was a derogatory word of calling the Haudenosaunee the Iroquois. But it's widely accepted, and I don't think you'll get punched in the nose if you say Iroquois. But don't quote me on that. So the five nations then will become the six nations of the Haudenosaunee. You can pronunciate it a few different ways, but it could be the Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee Confederacy, made up of six nations. It originally was five nations: the Seneca, Cayuga. We'll go the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. Primarily located in present-day New York State. This is a map of the territories of the Haudenosaunee. The Mohawks to the right, the Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, and this little area in the center is the Tuscaroras. They joined the Confederacy in 1722. They fled from the Carolinas, and they were included in the 5 nations, which became the six nations of the Haudenosaunee. So the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was formed long before European contact, governed by the great law of peace, decisions made by consensus, and clan mothers as their leaders. So I just want to set the stage a little bit, some information that I got about. I think we visualize and we think about when the Europeans came to America and what it was like when they got here. So one fact that's kind of interesting is that they estimated about 5 million Native Americans, Indians in North America in 1492. 5 million. You don't think about that many. You think about a scattered group. You know, so many things had a factor on that, but so the 5 nations were really at war for a long time, fighting each other. You know, there was blood wars, there was a lot going on. And then there's some dissension on, somewhere around the 12th century, a person that we know of as the great peacemaker came along, and he was helped out by Hiawatha. And those two went on a campaign to unite the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee. Talked about peace, talked about consensus, representation, and really to form a democratic type government for the Haudenosaunee. And they came all together in peace and unity, you know, and that's really indicative of this Hiawatha belt that we're going to jump in real quick and let my brother Dwayne tell us a little bit about. You see this belt in a lot of different places in this image, but it's very relevant to our history.
Well, the Hiawatha belt is, I got one right here. This is the shell itself rather than glass. And well, you figure that the natives were warring, like he was saying, with each other. And what they were doing, they weren't realizing that they were families. And the peacemaker let them know that the family shouldn't war. You should be all under one house. And as they all got together and he realized that he got them all together, he talked to them that they should bury their weapons underneath the peace tree, the tree of peace. So that's where you get the term bury the hatchet. Well, in the great law, the one thing that they were saying was, when he talked about strength, unity, is you take one arrow would break very easy. You'd snap it. But if you take 5 arrows, they become a lot stronger. They bind together and they won't break. And he was trying to let the nations understand that. And each one of the nations was represented by 1 arrow, the 5 arrows. So when you bind them together, the 5 arrows, they become one unit, one head, one body, one mind. And they could counsel together. They became family. And that's what this was all about, was family. And with the Hiawatha belt, they left the end open. And that was for anybody that could come in. And what Rick had said was the Tuscarora came in later. So the roots reached out north, south, east, and west of the great white pine. And there was the eagle on top. And the branches spread out. And that was, underneath the branches, you were in the safe area. You were in safe land. And that's what the Hiawatha belt is. It's a belt of peace. That's what we live by, is peace. And for this conquest of our country, that was very terrible for us, because just as what Rick was saying, it was a losing battle for both sides, for the Native people. Now, you take today's nation, as they grow, they'll look back onto this belt, and it's turned into a flag, and it's flown all across the world as a peace flag.
Thank you. So a little more, we're going to spend probably a third of the time before the revolution, then we'll talk about the revolution, then we'll talk about after. So before the Revolutionary War, the Haudenosaunee were a powerful political and military alliance, very active in the fur trade. The fur trade became a lot of problems. There was beaver wars that ended in 1701, where a lot of the nations fought against each other because the Europeans had came and that beaver pelt had a lot of value, so it really caused a lot of problems. Generally speaking, the Haudenosaunee had a long-standing alliance with the British. They call it the Covenant Chain. And just a couple things I want to mention as we set the tone. There's three major things that came to our country from Europe that weren't good and were very, very bad, actually, for the Native Americans, the Indians here in the U.S., now the U.S. So the first one was muskets. We had never seen gunpowder and muskets before, and it wasn't just for war, it was for game, for getting those beavers and those pelts that were traded and used, for a bunch of different reasons. So muskets were a big problem. Alcohol. Alcohol first used as gifts, and then became very disruptive to the Native Americans that were here. But the third is the biggest, and that was disease. So, if we use between 3 and 5 million is the estimated population of Native Americans in North America, we'll say in 1492, by 1800 it was about 500,000. So they estimate between 90 and 95% of Indians, Native Americans on North America died of disease in those 300 years. 90 to 95%. There was no immunities. Those diseases weren't ever on this continent, so smallpox was probably the biggest one, but it was measles, mumps, diphtheria. There was a lot of different disease that all came. So there was already a lot of problems other than the war that was impending. The Treaty of Paris was a big factor at the time, because after this, we're almost up to, we're at 1763. The French and Indian Wars, or the 7-Year War, ends. There's a Treaty of Paris, and pretty much the French gave up all the land from the Mississippi east to the Atlantic Ocean, and they gave it up to the British. They lost the war. They conceded all that land, knowing full well, at that Treaty of Paris, that was mostly all Native American land. But the British really felt that was their land now, because they had won the war with the French, and that was going to be a big factor. Influence on the colonists, Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both had connections and really looked favorably on the Great Law of Peace and the way the Haudenosaunee ran their government by consensus. The nation still had a lot of decision making that they could do on their own, but they still had to go to the central government, we'll say, to make any major decision, and it had to be unanimous too. So Ben Franklin on the Haudenosaunee, the Great Law, in a speech to representatives of Pennsylvania, Franklin once referred to the Haudenosaunee system of governance, saying, "The precepts of government under which the six nations have prospered for centuries can teach us much if we have the wisdom to listen. So they recognize that, you know, so that kind of gets us up to the time of the Revolution. You know, I have it written down as the colonists versus Great Britain. The Haudenosaunee met, you know, and they were being pulled on both sides for the Patriots and towards the British. They initially declared neutrality. They thought the best thing was to stay neutral. They weren't going to interfere with a family war, is which they called it. They were going to stay neutral. That was going to be pretty hard to do. They wanted to, and that was to avoid internal conflict, because some of the nations had very close alliances with the British. The Oneidas and the Tuscareras had a pretty good alliance with the Patriots. So neutrality was going to be the best answer. So the war starts, and initially, you know, we're staying pretty neutral. I did find something very interesting that I never knew. I found a lot of stuff over these last 6 months that I never knew when I deep dived into our history. The Declaration of Independence, you know, it has a lot of stuff that we've all heard, but it's also, there's 27 grievances also listed in the Declaration of Independence. There are 27 grievances that are explaining why we need to separate from the British, why we need to do that. Oh, and the 27th grievance, which is very interesting, so the very good feeling part of it, we'll say, in the Declaration, you know, which we've all heard, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That all sounds wonderful. But the 27th grievance of the Declaration of Independence, which they understood that they were trying to, they didn't know where, they wanted the support of the Native Americans. The British did, so did the Patriots. And there was some propaganda going on. In the 27th grievances, the King of England has attempted to afflict frontiersmen with merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. They knew that that wasn't true. You know, when you look at Ben Franklin and you look at a lot of the stuff that they were talking about, there was absolute contradictory to that. It wasn't true. They had a good system of government. They envied it. They understood that system, you know, and it's really considered that the Haudenosaunee have the oldest long-standing democracy in the world, even to this day. It really is the basis of a lot of our Constitution is based on how they ran their government. So, you know, a year goes by and the divisions are becoming more clear. The Confederacy split for the first time in really since probably 1200. So we're talking 300 to 500 years of basically getting along. There's some troubles, but you know, they're governed pretty well. They have a good system of government. And it's time that everybody has to take sides at that time. Whether you're living here in the colonies, whether you're British that's here, whether you're an Indian, whether you're Native American, whether you're a slave, you have to start making decisions on which side you're gonna get on, because you're forced to. So the Confederacy split for the first time in, we'll say, 300 to 500 years. Different nations chose different sides. So nations supporting the British were the Mohawks, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga. And basically why? The British promised limits on colonial expansion. Expansion, you know, people were coming to this country in thousands and looking for a place to live. The colonies needed to expand westward, which was coming right into all land that was Native American land. So the British pretty much said, come with us, we're going to help this colonial expansion that's really happening. And they had long-standing alliances with the British, with trade and support in many ways. Nations supporting the Americans were the Oneida and Tuscarora. A couple reasons why. There was a missionary influence. A guy by the name of Samuel Kirkland came along, and was teaching Christianity to a lot of the Native Americans, and a lot of the Oneidas and Tuscareras. You know, he had a big influence on their decision making. He had a big connection with the Patriots. So he was really telling them to, you know, this is the way to go. There was local Patriot relationships, and basically the colonies were telling the same thing to the Haudenosaunee. Stick with us. We're going to stop this expansion, and you won't lose all this land as the country needs to expand or wants to expand. Why neutrality failed? You know, the fighting moved into the Haudenosaunee lands pretty hard. There was a lot of pressure from both the British and American governments. I'm just going to look at my notes to make sure I don't go by anything too fast that I had notes on. So anyway, there was just a lot of pressure from both sides that you were going, from the British and the Americans, that you had to pick sides. In settler expansion, of course, like I mentioned, threatened native land. I want to mention a few key leaders of the time. Joseph Brant was on the side. He was a Mohawk leader. He was on the side of the British. He was a very key figure in the war. Corn Planter was a Seneca war chief. And then, of course, we have Polly Cooper. Was a Oneida leader that ended up at Valley Forge. And do you want to mention a little? And I'm going to jump in to have Dwayne talk a little bit about Polly Cooper because it's relevant to us. And I know I'm going through 800 years of history here pretty fast, and we're going to have questions at the end, and I'm sure we'll answer them as best we can. I mean, my brothers know a lot more about it than I do. All I know is what I've read and crammed in these last 6 or 8 months, and a lot of it's contradictory. There's not a lot of written history. A lot of it's oral history. You know, and in conversations I had with our father when he was still alive, is so important that you tell your children everything you know about your history and about your heritage, because it's not written down. And if you don't do that, it's going to be lost. You know, so a little side note there. We just talked about Polly Cooper a little bit, who ended up at Valley Forge.
Well, I have to say Rick is very good at what he does because he's doing an awesome presentation here. Polly Cooper, she was Oneida. What was going on was in Valley Forge, as much of us know in our history classes, George Washington was starving in Valley Forge. His men were starving. They were eating their boots. They were eating whatever they could eat. The Oneidas heard about that. The Oneidas took the colonists' side. And when the Oneidas heard that, Chief Skenador and Polly Cooper and about 40 to 50 Oneidas got together and took the trek down the Valley Forge from the Oneida area, which is like 250 miles, in the winter. And they brought corn down there to help feed the soldiers. And in our history books, they say a group of Indians came and saved George Washington at Valley Forge, and that was it. But the group of Indians was Polly Cooper and the Oneidas. What Polly Cooper did was, when they brought corn down, they brought bushels and bushels and bushels, hundreds of bushels of corn. These men are starving. They came with the corn, and the men tried eating the corn right away. They can't eat through the husk. It will swell up in their belly and die. They'll die from it. So she taught them how to get the husk off, how to make soup with it. She had medicine. She had, I should say she, but the Oneidas had furs. They had all kinds of stuff, and they were bringing these men back to health, which was awesome. And the really awesome part about the deal is that Polly Cooper was our father's 7th generation grandmother. Polly Cooper and the Oneida people, the Haudenosaunee, believe in the 7 generations. How you look forward to what's gonna happen for your family. You always look at your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Well, they're looking 7 generations ahead. So Polly Cooper, 7 generations ago, helped our father.
Wow.
And then I would be 8 generations, he would be 8. Adam would be 9, or Ed would be 9. I see Adam here too.
Adam's here, yeah.
Adam, I know Dylan's here too, so I'd be her 9th generation grandmother. Now, that's really awesome to have that kind of a history, you know, in our bloodline. And she was, when she did her, got done helping the men, the actual Oneidas went back to Oneida. She stayed to continue to help. And when she was done and decided to go back, they wanted to give her some money. They wanted to give her something for helping, and she refused it. She said, we're here to help you. So Mrs. Washington, Martha Washington, had seen Polly, and seen Polly walking through Philadelphia and seen the shawl that she was gazing at, and she ended up buying her that shawl and gave it to her. So it was a gift, the Polly Cooper shawl. It was kept in Onondaga for a while. It is in Onondaga right now, as a matter of fact, and we seen it about 2 weeks ago at the Albany Museum. Got some pictures of it. It was really cool. And the thing about when Polly Cooper and Chief Skenador, when you see the pictures of George Washington, a lot of them you'll see a big Indian guy and a little Indian woman in a lot of the paintings. And then that would be Polly Cooper and Chief Skenador. Chief Skenador was like 6'5" and was a warrior that George Washington wanted next to him. So if anybody was going to fight, you know, try to kill him, you know, Chief Skenador would take care of him. But that was really, really interesting to find out how Polly Cooper is related to us. Now, my name is Dwayne Honeyall, it's my American name. My Indian name is Guy Twakie, which means corn planter. Now, we all have our own names, we have our own clans, and we take after our mother. So our mother was Onondaga Beaver. Father was Oneida Wolf. Polly Cooper was Oneida. So that's how we get our bloodline from Polly Cooper.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So how cool is it? I find some new heritage, and then I find out that, you know, I have a nine times great grandmother who was at Valley Forge. It's really kind of interesting. So we're going to jump a little bit ahead. You know, there was frontier warfare. You know, it was guerrilla style fighting. You know, where there was a lot of you know, it was a different kind of fighting than the British were used to. There was a lot of raids on settlement, and the civilian impact of the war was severe because a lot of the civilians in the colonies at the time were neutral. You know, it was really a civil war. It was a civil war for many people in the colonies. You know, I've read that, you know, 25% of the colonists were pro-British, 25% were patriots, and 50% were kind of in the middle. They really didn't they didn't know where it was all going to end. So the civilian impact was really big at the time. You know, so we're gonna jump to Fort Stanwix, which may be more interesting to us here too, because at Fort Stanwix was a fort that it was built by the British in the French and Indian War, the 7-Year War, and then it was unoccupied. Then it was occupied by the Patriots. So it really is relevant to us here in our area when we talk about the Battle of Bennington. And as we all know, many of us know, or you don't, Burgoyne, there was a plan to sever the colonies pretty much in Albany. It was going to cut the colonies apart, and it was going to be very successful for the British. Burgoyne was going to come down through with about 8,000 men. He got a little sidetracked in Stillwater, and some of his men got really sidetracked at the Battle of Bennington. They were coming to Albany. Howe was coming up from the south in St. Ledger, along with Joseph Brant. They had swerved over to Lake Ontario. They were coming across from the west, and they were going to take Fort Stanwix, and then end up in Albany with the two others. Well, Fort Stanwix and the Battle of Oriskany it's really important to us as Haudenosaunee because the Mohawks and Cayugas were with St. Ledger. And there was a group of the other Haudenosaunee, mostly the Oneidas and the Tuscaroras, were with the Patriots. And a big battle happened at Oriskany. Oriskany, we could probably have our whole talk just on Oriskany. It was arguably one of the bloodiest battles of the whole Revolution. 50 to 55% of the people in the battle were killed. Wow. By battle standards, that's just unheard of, that kind of. It was a lot of hand-to-hand. There was a thunderstorm in the middle of the battle. So, their muskets and their gunpowder got wet, so it ended up a lot of hand-to-hand. Why it's really big to us is it's really the first time in 300 to 500 years that Haudenosaunee are killing each other. It finally happened. There was alliances, but Oriskany in that battle, the statistics say about 500 were killed. I think they were figuring about 70% of the Patriots were killed. The battle was kind of nobody necessarily won or lost it. It was pretty bad for the Patriots, but it kind of ended abruptly, and the British headed back to they really wanted to take Fort Stanwix back. Fort Stanwix was a big trade area, as you can see, out through the Mohawk Valley, and it was from Lake Ontario. That was really strategic. So, and they never did really get that back, but that was really, to me, from what I've read, the turning point of all those years, centuries of peace, relative peace. And then the Haudenosaunee would never really be the same or as strong after the Revolution, and really not after the Battle of Oriskany. So that we could do a whole talk just on that, I think. But after that, the war goes on. That was, by the way, August 6th, 1777. Not very far from the Battle of Bennington.
Right. Yeah.
A few weeks. So it was crucial. It was certainly bad for the Haudenosaunee, but it was really crucial in Burgoyne losing at Saratoga, because he did not get that support from coming down with St. Ledger. He never made it to Albany. After Oriskany and Fort Stanwix, he headed back to Canada. So he didn't get the support from Howe. He decided to go to Philadelphia instead, as I recall. And actually, St. Ledger made him keep going, but Benedict Arnold at the time, who was on our side, he sent word to them that there was 2,000 men and they would never win. It wasn't true. It was a ruse. He sent the word to them, and they said, well, listen, we can't beat 2,000 men. They went back to Canada. So it was very relevant to Bennington, to Saratoga, to that whole campaign, Fort Stanwix. And it was really, really bad for the Haudenosaunee. So now we're going to fast forward to about 1779. The Sullivan-Clinton campaign is ordered to really completely break the Haudenosaunee resistance. Any support for the British is really going to be done by this campaign. So it's really considered a scorched earth American military expedition by John Sullivan and James Clinton. It was really to punish the Haudenosaunee for siding with the British. 4,500 Continental soldiers marched through Indian territory. And as you can see, maybe you can see and you can't see, all these red triangles, they all represent Indian villages destroyed on that march. 40, at least 40 is the low number. Indian villages were completely destroyed, burnt down. Kill as many as you can. take all the crops, burn every structure down. You know, and that was the goal. It led to widespread suffering. You know, people fled to many different areas, starvation, exposure to the cold, and this was really, it was successful in breaking the will of the Haudenosaunee pretty effectively. General John Sullivan here has a quote, "I flatter myself that the orders which I was entrusted are fully executed, as we have not left a single settlement or field of corn in the country of the Five Nations, nor is there even appearance of an Indian on this side of the Niagara." That was their goal, and they were pretty good at it. The campaign, you know, it was villages burned, crop destroyed, and all food supplies eliminated. Most every village had a large supply of food, that, you know, dried game and all kinds of things. So the effects of the campaign were widespread famine. Thousands of Indians were displaced, and many fled to Canada at that time. We're jumping around, we're jumping through this war pretty fast, but we're at the end of the war in 1783. The Patriots have won. We have I'm talking about a few different treaties, but there's many treaties throughout these years. In the years that follow this, there's many as well. The problem with a lot of these treaties is that there was no representation from the Haudenosaunee or any other native nations in most of these treaties. They were between sovereign nations, but they just left out. So the Treaty of Paris, the Haudenosaunee were excluded from that treaty completely. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get out of the Sullivan campaign, Curtis wanted to say something.
Yeah.
You want to say something about the Sullivan campaign?
Curtis, yeah, you're right. Curtis is trying to wave to me, and I thought he was just saying hello. So this is Curtis Waterman, if anybody came in late. You know, he's brothers of David and Dwayne. So he wants to talk a little bit about the Sullivan campaign.
Okay, let me start this properly. Yoheskeno, Swakwigi, Hanagayaki, Yawawage Satan, Tahendiok, Gaye Wanuxke Ungesta. I'm thankful you're well. I'm happy you're here. I'm Beaver Clan of the Longhouse. And my name is Tahendiok, and it means he who stirs up things. And so, yeah, I see a lot of gray hair out here, just like me. And what I wanted to say was, as I was growing up, I lived with my grandmother. We had the same mother. At the time, I'm the oldest, and my mother was 16. And she didn't want anything to do with the child at that time. So my grandmother came to the hospital and said, we'll take him, because he'll grow up and he can help around the house when he gets older. So I lived with my grandmother, and she would tell this story about our runner. She said runners came to the house, and back in the day we didn't have cell phones or whatever, but we had runners that would go from nation to nation with news. Mm-hmm. And a runner came to the house and said, gather all that you can and go up to the big hill, because the troops are coming. So she said they grabbed what they could and went up to the big hill. And I don't know if any of you know where Syracuse is, where Onondaga is, but if you head south on Route 81, just past the Brighton exit and you're heading towards Nedrow, right in front of you there's this big hill. That's all Onondaga land right there, still yet to today. And on top of that hill is where the Onondagas ran, because the Sullivan campaign was coming through, and as he mentioned, they were burning crops, burning houses, and they stayed up on that hill for a couple, 3 days, and the Sullivan troops never went up on top of that hill. They burned what they did what they had to do, and they moved on. And I thought about that as I got older, and I'm like, wait a minute. My grandmother is telling me this story of back in 1700s. So she's telling me a story of her great-great-great-grandmother. But that brought that whole story current to me in my memories. So that history became really current. And the other story that I heard through time as I went over to the Cayuga territory, over there's a gully called the Great Gully. And the same thing happened over there. The campaign went through, and the Cayuga people ran into this gully, which is a quite large gully. And the troops came over to the edge and started looking down, and they were going to kill the Cayugas. But they made loud noises, and because it was a gully, it echoed. And it made their numbers sound even larger than what was down there. So the troops said, we're not going down there, there's too many of them. So that's how they saved themselves through that gully. There is a lot to be said, as you mentioned, 600, 500 years into an hour and a half here. So there's a lot, because of my gray hair, that I could say, but I'm just trying to think where I could go next here. Our government and it allowed the men to choose for themselves what side they wanted to fight for, or stay neutral. They weren't ordered to just go to one side, or Onondaga is going to fight for the Patriot. The men were allowed to choose for themselves. And then when the war was over, they were able to come back, and everybody was supposed to accept their decision as far as them choosing a side. So that was part of our government, our teachings, the autonomy that we had. And there's a lot of women's suffrages that happened because of they saw the women at Onondaga walking around. They were respected. The women owned land, and the women were a matriarch. The women held the power. The clan mothers held the power. And Jocelyn Gage was part of the women's suffrage over neighboring Seneca Falls. That's what started the women's suffrage movement, because she visited Onondaga and said, these women, they got power, and our women do not. So along with the Articles of Confederacy, as he was talking about here, was copied by Benjamin Franklin. And you see it today, and we have clan mothers. It actually starts with the people, then it goes to the clan mothers, who are heads of those families, and then all of those clan mothers have chiefs that are supposed to represent what the clan mother tells them, and then there's council, and then there's the grand council, and those were symbolic of the legislative breakdown that's in the government today, and luckily some of that is happening today, where the checks and balances are starting to work, to where judges are making things right, saner minds are coming to the forefront. But I'm just trying to think what else. Yeah.
Well,
If anything pops up, I'll let you know.
We're gonna let him jump back in, because these guys have and like I said, these guys have so much more information than me, because, they've been taught it throughout their lives, and I'm trying to cram it all into a short here presentation, but, so the end of the war is 1783, the Treaty of Paris, the Haudenosaunee are excluded, Britain pretty much gave up native lands that they assumed they own, and it set the U.S. boundaries, once again, very similar to it did before the war. This time, the colonies end up saying that they own from the Mississippi to the Atlantic. Pretty much the same area that the British, took claim to after the 7 Years' War. So once again, the lines are drawn again. And unfortunately, both sides, Oneidas, who stuck with, and Tuscareras, who sided with the Patriots, and the other nations that sided with the British, it didn't end up very well for either side. The immediate aftermath, there was forced treaties with the U.S. A lot of these treaties were made, there's hundreds of them, and a lot of them aren't recognized by the Haudenosaunee or other Indian nations because they didn't take any part in them. But the land was all given and sold and traded without the input from the Native Americans. So loss of land and autonomy. So, and then 1784 was the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, which was a pretty important treaty. And it really kind of sided with the Oneidas and Tuscareras because they sided with the colonists, and it wasn't very favorable to the other nations as far as their land went. There was a lot of relocation, after the war, and we could go into where a lot of the different people went. A lot went to Canada, because Canada was British, and but the land was and not everybody, even the Treaty of Fort Stanwix was never fully ratified by the Grand Council because there was so much disparity on who got what land. They really didn't want it to be. So the long-term consequences, a loss of power of the Haudenosaunee, continued resistance and diplomacy. There was a lot of ongoing land claims and huge loss of land for the Haudenosaunee. This is a very interesting slide. You may not be able to see the numbers from the bottom, but it's very relevant. So pretty much before the Revolution, the Senecas had 6.5 million acres. This is pretty much by probably 1850. They went from 6.5 to 56,000. The Cayuga had 1.9 million acres, 70. Onondaga, 2.6 million, down to 7,300. The Oneida, one time had 6 million, at this particular time 3.7 million. The 6 million was right after the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, because they got favorable treatment. They were quadring off 6 million acres. They ended up with 32 acres. Coincidentally, that 32 acres, Hanyo's property. The 32 acres that were left were the Hanyo's home. Homestead. That was the last, and it's still there today, by the way. So, and the Mohawks had 9.9 million. They ended up with 14,000. So obviously, the land, it really didn't matter that much, I suppose, which side you took. The land, it was all really about the control of this land and the expansion. Contributions that are often overlooked, the military alliances that, that we had with the Patriots or with the British. And a lot of, and that's what really was really telling to me over these 6 months or 8 months that I've been doing a lot of work on this and looking into my heritage. It's not what we're taught, or I was taught, even though my second grade teacher is here. Coincidentally. Miss Ferrara, Mrs. Lestate. We're not taught a lot about this stuff. It really is, I think it's coming around more, but, and we're really not even taught of how much the revolution was a civil war. Even between the Patriots. We have this vision of overthrowing the British and throwing the tea in the water, and everybody just wanted their freedom, and everybody wanted, and it just wasn't that way. It was a civil war. It was a civil war for the Native Americans, as we've talked about. And it was certainly a civil war, as we know, all the stories we hear of the Revolution, with neighbors and friends and cousins killing each other on each side. So, Curtis wants to jump right in. Yes.
I remember. Back when the crops were burned back in the Sullivan campaign, the spring of that year, the 17-year locust came out. And that was, along with the buried corn and preserved meat that were in the ground for times of despair, that helped the Onondagas survive the winter. But in the spring, when them locusts came up, that was a base of protein that they had. So every 17 years when them locusts come up, we have a homage time where we eat those locusts in homage for them saving our ancestors during that time period. One other thing I want to mention, which he did mention, was going back to when Columbus came and hit the shores. How many have heard of the doctrine of discovery? Crickets. The Pope put out, there were two doctrines, but the doctrine of discovery that Columbus used basically said this is when you, I'm trying to paraphrase it, when you reach that land belongs to the person that you're going there for, which in Columbus's case it was Spain. That land belongs to Spain. If those people that you meet are not Christian, which they're not going to be, that those people only have the right to occupancy. That's what that doctrine said. So therefore, it was pretty much in their mindset that this land is theirs. And the native people only have the right of occupancy, they don't own that land. So that's the basis, that's a worldwide doctrine. Everywhere there was discovery, that was put up by the Pope. So, thank you.
Your talk made me think of your other talk when you said that a runner, it came and told about the Sullivan campaign coming, and I thought it was very telling, and I hope nobody here works for the post office. Because they say, it's pretty well written that these runners could travel many, many miles, and you could get a message from Albany to Syracuse in 2 days. Wow. By runners. And they would transfer it, 2 to 3 days. We can't get our mail. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to insult the mail people now, but I think maybe we could go back to runners. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's very. I thought that was interesting. So, why this history matters. The war was not just. My first slide said the war was between the Patriots and the British, but as we know and as we're finding out more and more, it wasn't just the Patriots and the British. The indigenous nations shaped these events, and and I had mentioned about the warfare. Both sides really wanted the Indian help because they understood how to fight in this environment. And they had ways of moving through the woods where it looked like there was way more people, way more natives than there was. It was a tactic that they used. And they understood how to fight through thousands of years, if they had to, in these areas where the British and the Germans, and they didn't quite understand how this was all going to go. So both sides wanted that alliance. The consequences, of course, are still felt today. Was neutrality possible? Is a question. Who benefited most from the war? how should this history be taught? Those are all questions that I don't necessarily know the answer to. And of course, there's a Hiawatha belt.
That's the original.
That's the original one. That's, I'm not sure where it is now. Is it in
It's
Onondaga?
in Onondaga.
That's the original belt. You know, with the white pine in the center. You know, and that's very relevant about burying the hatchet. You know, that it's symbolism, but it's the truth. You know, and that white pine is very relevant to everything, and we really could dovetail it in today very easily. You know, with all the troubles that we have. You know, these nations at war could all come together, and that white pine is symbolism. It had an eagle at the top. You know, the roots went in 4 directions at the bottom, so it could go in each direction. The white pine needles come in clusters of 5, representing the 5 nations of the time. You know, so there was just so many things that went into that. You know, those are all questions that we don't really necessarily know the answer to. But that's kind of the end of my discussion. You know, we're going to be open for any questions that you have, and these guys can, my brothers can, did you want to say anything, Dave? Do you want to talk about, you know, our father lived here in Hoosick Falls. Many of you, we'll just mention real quick, many of you know him by Bobo Marks, but his actual name is David Hanyos. So, you know, he lived over on Clay Hill on Hurley Street. And he was very well known. We had, anybody that knows the history, there was over at the Emler Estate, the Warren Mansion, there was a Indian village over there where every summer Onondagas and Seminoitas came to that village, and it was a mock village. It was they weren't actors because they were real Onondagas, but they set up a village over there, and we had relations. And I have since found in my history a lot of the names of the people that were there, and there are cousins in our relations.
Wow.
You know, so it's very relevant to Hoosick history. You know, in Dietz, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about some modern times. You know, do we want to come into the 1970s and battles? And you know, Dietz has a history too of. He was telling me a story when he was 13 with an M1 sitting on his shoe, or you know, so.
Well,
Or you as well, Curtis, if you want to jump in a little bit to more modern times. So you know, after the Revolution, the Haudenosaunee was never the same. That's really the. You know, I probably do have an ending statement here somewhere. Let me jump into that before we, you know, so I don't lose total track of. Yes, and we do have to talk about the wampum, the 2-row wampum too. Maybe you can do that. So, the Iroquois played a significant and complicated role in the Revolutionary War. The war divided the Iroquois Confederacy, forcing nations to choose sides in order to protect their land, power, and future. These choices led to lasting consequences, including loss of land and the weakening of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. By understanding the Iroquois' experience, we see that the Revolutionary War was not just a fight for independence, but a conflict that deeply affected Native nations as well. Remembering their story helps us to understand the true cost of war and why their history matters. That's my ending. Yeah, and then we're gonna. Yeah. So we'll jump into some other stories, seeing as we're on a good pace here. So, yes, go ahead, Dees. And if you or Curtis want to talk about the 2-row wampum, that would be awesome.
Okay, I can tell you what I know about it. I also probably should say, I am from Onondaga, but I don't represent Onondaga. I am telling you my personal story. The Truro was the very first treaty. You guys can help me out if you know different. Very first treaty with the Dutch. And you can see the two rows. They symbolize the non-natives in their vessel going down the river of life. And the other row is the native people in our canoe going down the river of life. And may they never touch. Meaning, you don't come into our government, we don't go into your government. We stay separate, and the middle three beads are friendship, respect, and forever. I think there's the forever part could mean something else too. But when the British came, the Dutch gave this to the British, telling them basically the story that I just told you of how it represents peace, friendship, and forever. And there was actually a ceremony that happened between the Dutch and the British. So they were supposed to have taken that and abided by the two-row. The problem with the two-row is that since we can't, or we're not supposed to go into the other vessel, when things happen through time, we don't go in and kind of defend ourselves because we're not supposed to go into the other vessel. At Onondaga, we have a group called Noon, Neighbors of Onondaga Nation. They lobby and do things for us. They're non-native allies. So when we need something to be done, we ask them and we go with them, let's say to Washington, D.C., but they speak for us. That's to honor this two-row belt.
Perfect. Well, I was really surprised to see one of his slides, the projector, and it talked about the Oneidas. Again, we're on the Daga, and our father, Dave and I, Rick, our father was Oneida, so that's where we grew up, was the Oneida territory. And when they were talking about all the land that was lost and the land that was in this today's date, it said 32 acres is left of Oneida. Well, them 32 acres was and is the Hanyos homestead, which is our name. Our father was David Hanyos. So in the 70s, we were living out here. They were, the nation, well, I shouldn't say the nation, the Oneida group got some trailers from FEMA out of Horseheads, New York, from a flood. They brought them to Oneida. Oneida got them. And they invited Oneida people to come back and reform the Oneida Nation of New York on the territory. And there was, it was run by an electoral government, and when all the Oneidas got there, they decided they didn't want electoral government. Electoral government is president, vice president, secretary. We want to be traditional, chief, clan, mother, and warriors. They had a dispute between the electoral Oneidas and the traditional Oneidas. The electoral Oneidas had connections with the state troopers and the government because that's their system. And long story short, the law came in and we captured 2 state troopers. And we held them, and they weren't hurt. They were just sat basically in the cellar of one of the buildings, and they understood that they were on sovereign land. And our father was the chief, and he wanted to do this this problem that we had through the laws, not through fighting. And long story short, we won, and because of the laws. Well, at one point, there were some other native people came in to take over Oneida, the territory. And the state troopers came, and they were on the outside, standing on the road, because it is sovereign land. And there was a lot of guns involved. I was in 7th grade, and I had an M1 carbine with a banana clip. And I was told to stand on the backside of a Jersey barrier. If anything happened, jump down, lay down behind the concrete. Because basically I was just a body. And there was no tension, but there was guns, a lot of police officers, a lot of federal marshals. The water was cut off, the electric was cut off. There was a lot of native things going on, whether it was Wounded Knee or out in Seneca. There was a lot of things going on at that time. And I got this M1 carbine, and I'm standing there, I was standing there for hours. My arms started getting tired.
Of course, you're 13 at the time, right?
Right. My arm got tired. So I'm holding it this way, holding it that way, holding it this way. Finally, it's my gun, and I know there is no bullet in my gun, because it's my gun. So I take my gun, and I put the barrel on my foot. I didn't want the barrel in the dirt. 13-year-old kid. So I'm standing there, and I picked it up, and I'm moving around, and this huge state trooper comes over. He had to be 6'5", 6'6". He comes over, and he looks at me, and he says, "Son, I really appreciate it if you would take that barrel off your foot." And I'm standing there like, "Yes, sir." So at that time, they got a picture. It was a picture that was taken of me looking up at a state trooper. And they say that was in the New York Times. That was 1972, 73, brother?
Yeah, something like that, yeah, 73.
Yeah. So that was, that's Indian times, native times of what's going on now in the world. And that's just my little story that I have of living on the territory of Oneida, New York.
Anybody have any questions?
Well, where's the Hanyas?
Go ahead, Jackie.
Where's the Hanyas homestead?
The Hanyos homestead is the question, so, yes.
The Hanyos homestead is in Route 46, Oneida, New York. It's in between Munnsville and Oneida. It's just a little 32 acres. It's not very big. And that, like I said, that is a territory. That's different than a reservation.
I'll say something. So that 32 acres, John Halios, our father went out there. Dad lived on Clay Hill, and he took my father out there. My dad went out there seeing John Halios, and he said to our father that this land belongs to you. And of course our mother's Onondaga, so he could hold the land. And of course Dad's from Hoosick Falls. He was, I'll say a little bit about Dad. Dad and Joycey Hanyos. My grandmother, which is Virginia Marks, lived out there on Onondaga Reservation, and they had Joycey and my dad. And things didn't work out. So Dad came here. Dad passed in '03. When he was like maybe about 4 years old. Joycey was I think a year older than him, and Louis Marks raised them, and that's why Dad used Markowitz as his name. And even though he's a Hanyos, everybody here knows him as Markowitz or Marks, and he still went by that. But as we got older, we lived in Hoosick Falls too in 1965, and he used his name as Hanyos because that's who we were. But back to that piece of property, Dad didn't want to go out there. He was in Hoosick Falls here, and then when my brother said the Oneidas are trying to get something going out there, of course Ray Harbert, who's the CEO of the Attorney Soul Casino, he was going to school. He was getting the education. He went to Harvard. And Aunt Gloria, which is his mom, and who is Dad's mother's sister, that's how we're all related, said that we're gonna have something going here, so Dad took us from Buskirk. We went out there and moved in 73, we moved out there, which I didn't wanna go, we didn't wanna go. I don't wanna stay in Cambridge, but like I said, we went to Hoosier Falls, I did, he did, he was in kindergarten, I think I was in 4th grade. And, well, we all went out there. So, they started getting something going out there, but as far as that house, the Hanios house, that house belonged to Nick Hanios. And Nick Hanios was John Hanios' dad, okay? And so we never lost that land. See, the government, like you said, the Oneidas we're on the other side, the winning side, so they all got pieces of the land out there, property. And all of them, they sold their property. And there's a case now, the state of New York, or state of Washington, United States, West Boylan, because one of the Hanioses was fooling around with a non-Indian, and he died. She tried selling that land, which belonged to us, okay? And went to court, well, we won. That was still our land out there. So that's when Dad came out there. He didn't want nothing to do with it, but it was his land. So then Ray Halbrader and Jake Thompson started the government out there. And, well, it wasn't doing too good. That's when the Halbraders or Ed Gloria and all them wanted us to come out there, and that's when we moved out there and started the government. But anyways, as far as that house, it was Nick Hanios' house. John Hanios grew up in that house, and we stayed in the house when we moved out there. We stayed in the Hanios homestead house. And well, as far as the land, we never lost the land. And there's people out there, and Dad could have started some problems with it, stop it, but he didn't. He didn't care because it was for the Oneida Nation, and he didn't. It was his family. We're all Oneidas. Well, I'm not. We ain't. You know, but as far as Dad's side, it was his relatives. You know, but well, that's the 32 acres that you see right here. 32 acres plus 10,000 acres, whatever, you know. But well, he's gone now. But like I said, Dad was from Hoosier Falls here. You probably all know who he is. He was born 1932, 31, something like that. Joyce was older than him, and well, you know, this is still a part of our family right here. You know, growing up here, and so, along with Cambridge. We were born in Cambridge, me and Dietz, Dwayne, and but hey, time goes by, but you know, it's just good to know that our brother Rick here is doing this, and I'm really proud of him, you know, and I'm happy my other brother, the big brother, Curtis, you know. And of course, my baby brother. Yeah, I want to thank everybody who's here, you know, to come here, you know, and I want to say once again, thank you, Rick.
Yes,
You
yes.
know,
Awesome.
and
So another question, yes. Thank you, Dave.
yep.
I want to know what's being done about it, getting your history written, your family history and all those things you were talking about.
As far as getting our family history written down, I don't know if anything is going on. Maybe that will, I had a vision, that, don't make it right, it wasn't really a vision. But when I discovered my heritage, you know, and I talked to my wife Beth about it, I felt that somewhere, where is this leading me? I really, right from the early days of when I found out, I said, this is leading me somewhere, I don't know where. Well, it appears that it has led me into this history end of it, you know, and really deep diving into our history. You know, we mentioned that a little bit, and I don't know if we really covered. So in the world of Indians and Native Americans, you are, in the Haudenosaunee specifically, whatever your mother is, so my father was an Oneida, you know, as well as Dave and Dietz, you know, we share the same father. Their mother was an Onondaga, so they're Onondaga. And that's the way it's been for thousands of years. That's how you know, since the Great Law, that created a very good structure of how you keep track of things. So you just are whatever your mother is, and you're encouraged, I think is what I'm being told, you're encouraged to marry. You can't marry within your own clan. But you know, you can marry any other, you're encouraged to marry a Native American, to keep
The blood strong.
the blood strong and to keep it alive, because you know, if you don't, you know, then, you know, that child doesn't have a clan. They're still Indian, if you ask me.
They're still
You know,
Indian.
they just don't have a clan because you are what your mother is, as far as your clan goes. Go ahead, Curtis.
I have a perfect segue for you.
Good.
Okay, we have these organizations back in Onondaga, Syracuse, New York. Non-natives and native people talking on a panel and things. And the question at the very end usually comes, okay, we heard the history. Now what? So I have 11 things here. 11, they're called call to actions of things that you can do to support the native cause. And I'm just going to read them. Thanksgiving. In your everyday life, make a practice of showing gratitude for all of creation and the many gifts Mother Nature gives us. Land rights. Give land back to indigenous peoples. Include language in land trust agreements, granting rights for traditional practices including foraging, hunting, and fishing. We're working with the land trust people right now. Whenever there's a land trust that's made, we want to implement language in there to where we can forage that land, even though it's not our land. As I told you before, we only have the right of occupancy. So let's occupy that land. Environmental stewardship. Vigorously protect the environment and all of nature's creations. Sovereignty. Insist that the United States respect indigenous sovereignty and uphold its treaty responsibilities. Seek to re-indigenize your own perspectives and honor those who have cared for the land for hundreds of generations. Self-education. Inform yourself about the history that impacts indigenous communities, such as the Two-Road Treaty, and the concept of coming together with a good mind. Civic engagement. Elect officials and judges who understand indigenous cultures, relationships, governments, law, and treaties. Hold them accountable to their responsibilities. Showing up. Support thriving Native communities by attending public events and frequenting Native-run businesses and offering your time and talents to Native causes. Rejecting stereotypes. Challenge and reject all stereotypes about indigenous people. Accurate histories. Insist that our children and grandchildren are taught accurate information about the histories, cultures, and contemporary lives of indigenous peoples in our schools. Solidarity. Recognize the responsibility that we all share in repairing past and present harms by acknowledging our common history as inhabitants of Mother Earth. Collective awareness. Share this call to action and other learnings with friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors to continually build awareness across communities about the issues facing indigenous peoples. That's what we leave with those people who come to talk with us. So, thank you.
There was a couple other questions, or if that's it, yes, go ahead.
I think from that, I'm taking that you guys have a lot of animosity toward the United States or colonists.
I wouldn't say there, you know, in my opinion, there's not a lot of animosity. You know, these talks, and I think this education about it is just a recognition of where we came from. You know, it's against our I'm not gonna speak for all the Haudenosaunee, but it's against their principles to hold that animosity and look for revenge or anything like that. This is just a recognition of that history that happened. You know, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. You know, so it's just a recognition of this history that isn't talked about a lot. There's a lot of information out there that, as I have found, if you want to look for it. You know, so if you want to leave here and do some research about the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, or about any of these battles, or the Sullivan Campaign, or Fort Stanwix, it all is relevant. You know, a lot of it goes back to, a lot of the stuff that I read talks a lot about this 7th generation. And if we can just take that away from this experience, that if we make our decisions, whether it's in our homes or whether it's in our government, that we think of how this is going to affect 7 generations from now. I think we'll think about things very deeper, you know, when we're talking about the land or whatever we're talking about. You know, it's very relevant to think about how this is going to affect 7 generations from now. If we do that alone, I think we'll make much better and more educated decisions. My little editorial.
Pretty good.
So anyway, that's kind of the end of our presentation. We're going to be here. We don't have anywhere to go. Feel free to come up and ask any questions you want. There's donuts and wine and drinks in the kitchen, and you're welcome to look around the museum. We have a couple things. We do have a couple things coming up if you want to return. February 12th, we have Phyllis Chapman's coming, and she's going to be the First Lady Dolly Madison. Then March 19th, there's some sheets around if you want to see it. We have Alexandria Crowell from the Bennington Battlefield. She's coming to do a presentation on Battle of Bennington and art and media through history. And then we have Rensselaer County historian Kathy Sheen coming April 23rd, and how we have commemorated 250 years of the United States of America. So that's all good stuff. You don't have to rush out. Like I said, there's some drinks and donuts to eat. And feel free to come up and ask us any questions you want.